I know. Last weekend was awesome. I'm looking for our next excursion. Maybe we should tell the folks like what we did.
Yeah. Go ahead. Why don't you tell them?
Okay, so we had made these plans a while ago. I think back in one of the cold months. It might have been February, January, but it was just kind of like we didn't know where it was going with the pandemic. You know, there were still no vaccinations, and we were on a Zoom call with a couple of other friends, and we were just all kind of like, okay, you know, hopefully things will get better in a few months. Let's just assume it does. We just need to sort of check out. So where can we go? And so we started looking for some Airbnbs, and we were like, let's go somewhere in May. You know, it'll be spring. The weather will be warmer. Hopefully we'll make some progress, you know, as a country with the vaccinations. And so we thought May would be the perfect time, but then there was Mother's Day and things like that. So we finally found a weekend where we were all free. And I found an Airbnb in Rhode Island, a beautiful part of Rhode Island. What was it?
Kingstown.
Kingstown,
yeah.
South Kingstown. So beautiful. We had the best weather.
We sure did. We got so lucky.
We found an amazing host.
Oh my God. Love me some Shaniqua.
I know. The house was impeccable. It had enough space. We didn't really have to share that many bathrooms, you know, when there's like 5 of us. So definitely we don't want to run short on bathrooms. So, because that could really make or break the experience. It was a lot of ladies. Everyone had sort of their personal space. There was a great outdoor part to it. We had the lake. The house was literally on the lake. We walked on the dock. We could have kayaked if we were feeling brave. But it turned out that weekend we just felt brave emotionally, not physically.
Not physically.
And yeah, it was just, I mean, you know, we laughed, we cried, we reconnected, and I think everyone left there feeling transformed.
You know what? I agree with that. It's funny. There was a moment while we were there that I felt like that transformation come over some of us.
Yes.
I don't know if you caught it, but I was like, wow, this is like a really magical moment.
Oh, I so caught it. I was all up in it. I was just like, oh my gosh, this is happening in front of my eyes. I caught it. And, you know, I think I would include us in that too, right? As far as like, I think relationships with some of our friends have even transformed. Like I saw people go through an inner transformation, but I think also there were transformations of relationships. And so I didn't include myself in that. It was like a waiting to exhale moment. You know, when I first saw that movie, I was too young to actually understand what exhaling meant.
Yes.
You know, sure, I understood the plot, but I didn't really internalize it.
Oh my God, I want to go watch it now.
I know. And now that we're the age of the women in the movie, that the women in the movie were, it makes so much sense. It makes so much sense.
That is awesome. And you know what? It just hit me that it's so right. I did not realize all of that.
Yeah.
I'm watching that this weekend.
Yeah. So we should have watched it last weekend.
I know. We should have.
Okay.
Man.
Let's book it. Let's book
Going back.
We're going back to the lake. What I loved is that we were able to sort of put those stressors in a box and really just focus on each other, because I think that those stressors take away just from our ability to connect with not only friends, but family members and just people in general on a daily basis and really nurture healthy relationships.
Yeah.
So that was our weekend, last weekend in a nutshell.
But like you said, it was really nice. It was a really nice weekend to just see everyone just like let loose. You know, let their guards down, just be vulnerable and just be like, F it, this is who I am, and just be present. So it was really nice. It was really awesome.
It was a safe space.
Yeah. Yes. You know, it's funny, like one of them actually said, I haven't been in a safe space like this in a while.
Yeah.
And that was like heavy. Not heavy in the sense that I was like, wow, it took a lot of gut for her to say that. And knowing her personally, I think to me, that was kind of like that transformational moment. I caught it for her in that, in that time frame. So it was really beautiful to see.
Yeah. But I think we often get so busy in our lives that we forget to really pause and unplug from the world, but plug into each other.
And, I think that's, again, it falls back to just being like in the hustle mode, right?
Yeah.
Just hustle, hustle, hustle. You have a lot to prove. You feel like you have a lot to prove, right? And the pressure from society is kind of like, no, I need to be on all the time.
Yeah.
I don't have the margin to fill, kind of like fall short on these things. You worry not only about yourself, and it's kind of like your spouses, your kids, like society, the workforce. Where do I fit? Like, I mean, am I enough? Am I being seen? Am I outside? Like it's so much. So we're always like in some sort of a hustle. Always, always, always. So it was good to see, everyone in that space and feeling safe and being like, you know what, I'm just going to unplug and kind of just, like you said, connect with the ladies that were present there and sort of like just unwind.
Yeah. And it was funny because I think for all of us, right, when we first got there, it took us a moment. It takes a moment to sort of actually unplug. Like you can physically be somewhere to unplug, but mentally you're still very much connected to the world and all your stressors. And so I noticed that as well. And so what was cool is that we all came at different times. So I think we all had our own runway to adjust and come down from the high stress. Yeah. And then finally, land and be like, okay, I'm actually present. But it took a few hours upon arrival to actually become present. I was conscious, though, of how long I spent on my phone because there were other things that I wanted to do that I usually don't get to do when I'm in my reality. So I really wanted to make sure that I had time to listen to the birds. I wanted to make sure that I had time to read. I wanted to make sure that I had time to just sit in the sun and be uninterrupted without like, I want a snack, So it was just,
I'm assuming that was your daughter's voice.
Yes. My friends don't ask me for snacks.
I was like, whoa, who's asking for snacks?
Kind of going back to what you were saying earlier about that constant need of hustling. I think part of the challenge in unplugging was also how often do we even do that? So it was almost as though for a moment, it was a little disorienting. And I think that's the point where people sort of went back to their phones because it was like, okay, so what do I usually do when I have downtime? And the fact is that most of us don't even have downtime. So now we've sort of become disconnected from like who we are and what we actually like and what brings us pleasure aside from scrolling through social media. So I do think that the more often you sort of unplug and try to do the work about shit, what do I like now?
Yeah.
The easier it will be to sort of stay off your phone and like, I don't know, do something like paint. I don't know, have a conversation with someone you haven't had a chance to talk to in a while. Or, there are different ways that people unplug. But it was a funny experience in the sense that it was like, a bunch of successful women and not really knowing how or we had to sort of remind ourselves how to unplug. At one point, I posted on Instagram that I was where I was exactly supposed to be.
Yeah.
There was a moment where I was outside and I was just sitting there reading my book and I lifted my head and I looked out and to the lake.
Yeah.
And it was just the most peaceful scene I had seen in a while. I just felt so at ease. I felt like my whole body was exhaling. And it was in that moment that I just did a quick post because that is exactly how I felt. I was supposed to be in that moment. And I often don't feel that way. I'm often racing to where am I supposed to be? Right? Like that's the question. And in that moment, I felt as though I had an answer. Right here is where I'm supposed to be, right here.
Did you feel like it took you a while to get there? Or is it one of those things that kind of just happened and then you caught yourself, you're like, oh.
No, I think it was one of those things where I caught myself and I was like, oh, but that's only because in the past, it would have taken me, in the past, it did take me a while to get there, but my life is completely different now. So no, it was just sort of that, it was a fleeting moment. Like it just happened and I captured it and there were no questions about that moment.
I found myself in something very similar, but I planned it. You know what I mean? Like,
okay.
Like meaning like I
that sounds like a hustle.
I know, but it's really not. So I kind of like, you know what? I am going to go and do this. Like I'm going to put myself in this position, in this situation, in this scenery, like in the scene right now. Because
you were intentional.
Yeah, like I wanted to experience it. So I was like, I'm going to go do this. It's kind of, like you found yourself sitting there and you're like, oh, I'm like, I belong. But I pulled myself to made myself sort of like, hey, you're going to sit here and you're going to listen for, I don't know, the birds or, the water or whatever the sound was happening at that moment. And I think you guys were all in bed at that point. It was super early. But yeah, I made myself just do that because not only do I enjoy it, but I was like, oh, well, what's the next time I'm going to find myself in a place like this, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I was like, why not take the opportunity and just, soak it all in?
I get it. Yeah. And sometimes that has to happen, right? Like, how you work best. And so sometimes you do have to be really intentional about it. Or, I mean, what I'm hearing you actually say is instead of planning, I'm hearing you say that you have prioritized it.
Yeah. Yeah. I would say that.
Like you were sitting here.
Yes.
On this goddamn ledge, and you can listen to those fucking birds.
Yes. Right. And it was good because I was like, oh my God, like this was really awesome. And it I don't know, I actually listened to my heartbeat because there was no other sound like aside from early morning birds or whatever. You kind of like listen for things that typically you don't listen out for.
Yeah. Well, that's what experts say that you're supposed to do that. Because I think sometimes people have a hard time, myself included, where you tell your mind, you're trying to meditate or you're trying to calm your mind down. And you're like, okay, mind, just be calm, calm. Right. But then that also, by you being so rigid with your brain, that also induces or causes some anxiety. And so you don't really calm. It's sort of counterproductive from what I've read, when you sort of just let your mind wander and you gently escort it back like you did, or like you listen for something else. Like, you went out there to listen for birds, but you listened to a heartbeat instead. Like that still was meditative in a way.
Yeah.
Instead of just being like, calm down.
All right, expert.
I've been reading a lot. That is my hobby.
Oh, girl, I saw you read.
You know what? I'm just trying to do people a favor. For people who don't have time to read, allow me to be a well.
Yes. No, it's great. It's a beautiful thing. I mean, that's what you need to do. Maybe that is your way of pampering yourself, right?
Oh yeah, because when I was in the mix, like when I was in my career hustle, I didn't have time to read unless it was related to work stuff. Right. That is the only stuff that I read. So yes, now I just read for pleasure. That is my pleasure. That brings me pleasure. That is my hobby, reading.
When you say that word, I think about bound chicka bound out. Completely off. I don't know why, but it's my
hobby.
No, pleasure.
Oh.
Yeah, my mind just. I literally just made that sound in the back of my head.
Pleasure means different things for different people. So now I know what it means for you. Bound chicka bound bow.
Bound chicka bound bow.
So let's peel back some of these things. Okay, so we all we both agreed that it took us a minute to disconnect, like maybe less than what it might used to take us to disconnect. But we definitely noticed it amongst our friends. So where do you think?
I think you and I got there quicker. Is that what you just said? You kind of cut off.
Yes. But I would say in the past, it might have taken us the same amount of time to get to that point where we just felt like we could exhale. I don't know. Maybe men go through this. I'm not sure. But I guess, particularly about Black women, I feel like we're always in hustle mode. And I just wanted to get your opinion about where you thought that came from.
The hustle mode?
Hustle mode. Is it a mom thing? Is it a Black woman thing? Is it?
I mean, I think it's a Black woman thing, right?
Yeah.
It's like I said earlier, I think it's the need to always wanting to prove yourself.
Yeah.
So it's you always have to be doing something or else you're not worth it.
Yeah. So then you think do you think we're conscious of depriving ourselves of pleasure? Or are we just so having to prove ourselves, we're like, well, we know we're depriving ourselves of pleasure, but we'll take care of that later. Like once we get to where we think we need to get, then we'll figure out our hobby.
Yeah. I don't know if we're conscious of that, right? I don't know if we know how to turn it off. You know what I mean? Like like for instance, I mean, I'm only going to speak for myself, but even I feel like now I, my life is in a completely different spot than it was then, but I feel like I have the space to sort of like pamper myself a lot more and prioritize my sanity. So, but even when I do that, I feel guilty about it sometimes. And it's like, well, man, like, am I slacking off? I mean, how are people looking at me? Or what are they thinking? I mean, am I being judged? You know what I mean? Am I being enough? It's like, so I literally like sit on it. I was like, fuck, like, why am I thinking that?
Yeah.
So it's like the constant need to just want to be like, yeah, I need to be doing something to be worth it.
Yeah. Ooh.
Like, why can't I just be worth it without having to do anything? So it's like, no, you're worth, like you're worth it because you're doing it. If you're not, then like maybe you're not. So it's a constant battle. I battle with that all the time.
Yeah. It's interesting that you called it pampering yourself, right?
Yeah.
Like I think even that in itself is a stigma, right?
Yeah.
Like, so what do you consider pampering yourself? Because you're taking care of your skin, or because you are, whatever? Are you because you're taking a bath?
Yeah. Right.
Like,
right. And those are like necessary things, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's life.
Yeah. So that's interesting. And then it's funny because so there is guilt associated with it. Like I sent this to you. It was an interview. It was on Essence, and it was an interview of two Black women. And one was Misa Hilton and the other one was Nicole Kane. And Nicole Kane, who used to be like this media mogul, just for our audience, obviously, but she used to be this like media mogul, and she sort of had a revelation. And she, as a result, she just sort of questioned the way that she was living her life. I think both her parents died at a young age. And so it just forced her to rethink how she was living her life. And she didn't like how she was living it. She didn't feel like she had any purpose to it. So she, as a result, reinvented herself. And she talks about this need that we have as Black women to constantly hustle. And that's what she was doing. And she was hustling to the point where she was stressed, she had anxiety, she was depressed. And she was living this fabulous lifestyle on the outside, but inside she was in turmoil. And I realized when she was speaking, and Misa was agreeing with this, she was definitely on board. And she, again, was successful in her own right in the fashion industry. And it was so funny because both women are what you and I would consider successful, in that they had power and they had money, but there was still this missing piece. Yeah. And I feel like in the Black, I can only speak from my experience, but this is something that I've noticed among Black women, is that we, again, like you said, we have this need to prove ourselves, which society has told us we had to do. Yeah. So it's not like it doesn't come from anywhere. Yeah. But I also think that the advice that we got from the previous generation was get educated so that you don't have to depend on anyone by any means necessary. And no one ever spoke about, in order to achieve this success, you also need to carve out time to take care of the person inside. And this is like, during the interview, this is what Nicole and Misa sort of brought up, that yes, they were successful on the outside and they did sort of what we were conditioned to do as Black women. But there's also this other side, this other piece to being a Black woman that we are not growing, cultivating, nurturing, and taking care of. And when we do, there's guilt associated. There's guilt associated with it. And I find that that's so interesting, because then it seems so counterproductive, right? First of all, like, what is our definition of success? And then how do you stay there?
Yeah.
Right? Like, the only way you can stay there is if you take care of yourself. But then why is there a stigma about taking care of yourself?
Right. Yeah. And it's hard to kind of find a balance.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's hard to kind of be like, how do you turn it off? Like, just gonna turn off my hustle mode. And it's like, how do you do that? There's no way of doing that.
Yeah. And I also think that there's fear associated with it, right? So like if you turn off your hustle mode at work, oh my God, what is that? That leaves you open, right? That leaves you open to possibly getting overlooked. That leaves you open to not climbing that ladder of success in whatever industry you're in. And so it feels like it leaves us susceptible to kicking us back, decades. And so I feel like a lot of times, or at least my attitude in the past was, I'm just going to get to where I need to get, and I'll worry about the ramifications of my health later.
Yeah. Wow.
Right? Because no one except a few people know this, but I had shingles before I was 40.
Yeah.
And that was, it was sort of this hustle was what was promoted at work, right? You feel guilty if you don't feel well and call in. You feel guilty if you don't put in FaceTime, right? And like, I think through the pandemic, I think some companies realized, okay, this meeting could have just been an email. So why are we forcing people to have FaceTime? But I think just in our society alone, it's just very glorified. The more hours that you put in, it shows that you're working harder. And the harder you work, the more successful you will be, the more you will be rewarded. And that's not always the case. And I think that a lot of us find out the hard way. Yeah. After we've made sacrifices, after we've sacrificed relationships, after we've sacrificed our health, we've missed doctor's appointments, we've done, we've missed dentist appointments, we have pains that we just live with and we hope will go away. And we do all this because of the fear of what will happen if we're not constantly on the go in hustle mode.
Yeah. And sometimes you realize, when you come to realizing it, sometimes it just may be a little too late. You know what I mean? And, that was it's funny, as you were talking, it took me back to my corporate days. That was that. Like, I was one of the very few people in so early, and probably sometimes I was the last one to leave.
Yeah.
And it was like every day for God knows how many years. And that was that, like, you needed to be on your A game. You needed to be presentable. You needed to be available. Yes, I can do this. I'm taking on more. Like, yes. And it's kind of like, that was that. That was my norm. That was the only norm I knew. Like, being able to say, no, I can't take on more. I can't do this. To me, it was almost impossible. It was kind of like, oh, you don't do that, then it's like that is knocking you back. Like, you going back to the end of the line.
Right. So Nicole talks about this thing. So she talks about getting hobbies because everything else has sort of been stripped away from us as Black women, and that we no longer give ourselves pleasure. And when she said it, it just resonated with me, and it's not pleasure like having downtime. Yeah, it's not. I mean, it could be, and it could be, right? It could be, but it's not necessarily.
But that's not what you're talking about.
No, like, it's not necessarily going out to the club and like popping bottles, right? It could be when you're in your 20s, But maybe the older that you get, again, because Lisa and Nicole, they were a little bit older, right? They're closer to our age, and I obviously, like, there should always be time to pop bottles, especially when you're in your 20s.
Go on and pop a bottle.
But like, I do remember feeling very disconnected from myself when I was hustling. I was very disconnected from myself. And then it just got to the point where I didn't even know where work ended and I began. Like, everything that I was doing was somehow connected to work, right? Like, what I read, what I did on the weekends, everything was just connected. I didn't know. I almost didn't even realize that I lost myself.
Yeah.
I didn't even realize that I lost myself. And so she talks about hobbies as sort of reconnecting.
A way to reconnect with it.
Yeah. With that inner voice. And it was funny. So last weekend, I don't know why I keep saying it was funny. I think that's my new phrase. I somehow got stuck in my head. I need to get it out. It's not funny. So coincidentally, last weekend, I had the opportunity to listen to my voice.
Wait, please dig deeper. How did you, what?
I had the opportunity to listen to my voice, just like being peaceful. You know, when I was out there, it was just, I had the opportunity to reconnect with myself.
Yeah.
And I was able to do it a lot quicker than I would have been able to do it in the past. But it was just a reminder that I do need to step away. I mean, I don't think unplugging should ever stop. But I felt so refreshed driving back home after the trip.
Yeah.
That it was very much needed. And, you know, it doesn't always have to be a trip. Like reconnecting with yourself doesn't always have to manifest itself in the form of a trip. But for me now at this point, if someone, like in the past, if someone asked me what my hobby was, I would have been very hard pressed to figure that out. I would have been like, watching TV. Like if someone would have asked me what my hobby was, I would have had to think about it for a while.
Right.
Because it was so long since I had engaged in a hobby.
Right. That's interesting. That was not that long ago.
Yeah. So.
And your hobby was watching TV.
Yeah.
So what's your hobby now?
Oh, reading.
Well, aside, yeah.
Can you tell?
Yes, I know we got that one. Do you have another one?
So it's not so much a hobby as something that I want to learn. Guitar is next on my list. Yeah, I have a guitar and it's just sat there and I am determined to play it. So I think that's the next hobby I'm going to pick up.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
My guitar. I can see you playing guitar.
Can you?
Yeah, I actually can. It kind of fits you.
Oh, it's an acoustic guitar.
Oh, yeah, I can see that.
Okay. All right.
I can totally see you walking with the guitar.
One of the things connected to what you were just saying. So I'm reading, guess what? A book. So I'm reading this book, and this connects back to your point about people being willing to share. And so in this book, it's by Ariana Huffington and it's called Thrive. And in it, she talks about basically how in society, particularly women, well, she actually thinks that society rules need to be rewritten by women because patriarchal society that we are living in, obviously, has been created by men and it doesn't work for women. And so she was saying that in our society, traditionally speaking, there are these two metrics that we chase that we think determine success. So like money and power. And she was saying, if you sort of like, that's how our work world, our landscape, our ecosystem is sort of designed, like chasing money and power. And she had done that for a little bit, obviously creating this like the media mogul that she became with the Huffington Post. And she just says that like it was like a straight path to burnout. And she realized that what she wasn't doing is more of the third metric, which she calls sort of the well-being. Like she was chasing success, like her idea of success was like running herself into the ground. And it made her very successful according to the measurements of society, right? Because she had the money and she had the power, but she had passed out from exhaustion. Anyway, she talks about just rethinking how we live our lives. And a lot of times we're not really living our life. We're going through the motions because we're not tapping into this well-being. We're not reconnecting with ourselves. We're not pausing. And she goes on to talk about when you die and someone eulogizes you, no one ever says, she was such a hard worker. Like she was so dedicated to her job that she spent 80 hours in the office every week and missed her kids' games. You know, it's so admirable how much she loved her job that she missed her kids' games. Her PowerPoint was amazing. She always had the best templates. Like no one says that shit. No one says that. Right. And what people really talk about are how funny someone was, like the connections that they had, the relationships that they had. So here's sort of what I learned from the interview with Nicole, right? And it reminds me of this quote that there's no such thing as there. And I think that it is important to live up to whatever your definition of success is. But I think it's equally as important to fill yourself, to find yourself, listen to yourself, and continue to recharge yourself so that when you do get to wherever your definition of success is, you can appreciate it, you can stay there for a while, but more importantly, that you just know that you have it within you to always recenter and reinvent, right? Like you can change it anytime. You can change your circumstances anytime if you're not happy with your circumstances. But I do think it's important to take the time, check in, assess, like, are you happy? Are you happy? Is this like, what are you ultimately doing this for? And make sure that you're living your life so that it aligns to what you think you're doing this for. Like that's my takeaway. That's my takeaway from last weekend. That is my takeaway from the interview with Nicole. Like, I feel like it all just sort of came together, because if you're not taking those moments, it's like, don't forget to live, right? Yeah. Don't just be about life, be in it. Yeah. And it doesn't take much to do that. You don't have to go to a lake house, right? Like you don't have to spend money to do it. I think one of your favorite things to do is just be silent, so it could be those moments before you go to bed where you just tune out everything. And like, I used to think that was a load of shit. I used to be like, what? Like, no, I don't have time to take 5 minutes before bedtime and like reconnect. How do I even do that? But like, the thoughts come. Like once you give yourself the stillness and the silence, the thoughts come. And it's like, hello, voice.
Yeah. But people are afraid of that. People are afraid of silence because they hear things that they're not willing to face.
Right. And those are the things that you need to listen to.
Yeah.
It's like you're scared of yourself.
Yeah. That's true. That is so true. Because silence can be scary. There's a lot to face in silence.
Yeah.
And not everyone's ready for that.
Yeah.
That's a good takeaway. I think, your well-being is a success on it, in and on itself.
Yeah.
In and on itself, it's a success. So I think, finding that well-being, embracing it, making time for it, is equally as important. When you do make the time to come up for air, I feel like you see things in different light. So
yeah,
that's your well-being. Come up for air.
Yes.
That's my takeaway. Come up for air.
That was a great, I like that one. Right. Unplug and come up for air.
Yes. Come up for air.
Unplug and come up for air.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Lifing It. Please visit us on Instagram at Lifing It Podcast for links to earlier episodes, or check us out on YouTube at Lifing It Podcast.